Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for the opportunity. I want to say good afternoon to esteemed colleagues, to local government representatives and partners. I do miss the community at large today. It is an honor to address this local government management conference. I heard comments made during the day about broken systems, about being disconnected with communities, about demonstrating non-professional conduct amongst colleagues. I also heard about the important role of technology, and we heard quite extensively about, or some about, silent mentality. My focus today is on capability. Specifically, how to systemically improve such capability within the local government sector. This should not be seen as an academic exercise. As in all societies globally, local government is the vital connection between the state and its citizens. And therefore service delivery failure at this level, amongst other, tend to translate directly into social friction, economic stagnation, and the erosion of democracy. In South Africa, we face a crisis of capability, and therefore need an innovative and contextually relevant map to navigate the future of local government. According to JARSH 2013 and onwards, the context is clear. The world is shifting from an industrial market economy characterized by hierarchy and structures and control towards a networked creative economy, demanding initiative, creativity, and passion. So needless to say, such global shift will make those globally accepted traditional public management models obsolete. The intent today is to offer a framework, the TIPS Managerial Leadership Framework, just as one alternative to navigate capability within local government. The TIPS frame is a multifocal framework which acts as a systemic awareness tool, assisting government leaders to make sense of their reality and to rethink assumptions about performance in an attempt to facilitate a capable working environment. So you may ask, why do we need a new lens? Why revisit existing management frameworks for local government? Globally, most of the existing management frameworks, if I look at it, are formalized from a predominantly rational Northern Hemisphere or a pragmatic Western Hemisphere perspective. I'm not sure we always reflect on that. They often fail to sufficiently consider contextual realities, lacking the dimensions of a holistic Eastern perspective and even a humane Southern global interpretation of reality, according to Lessem and Schaffer. The TIPS framework is a conceptual model developed from a longitudinal study spanning 18 years within the developing socioeconomic context of Southern Africa, that aims to offer a systemic awareness, as already indicated, of the multiple subsystems at play. It also compels one to rethink and dissect assumptions about work performance within a government context. It is a lens for making sense from our complex and interconnected world. The conceptual framework assumes the need to interlink the management of technology and innovation and people to develop and establish a core capability to manage and lead a municipality. Technology in this context simplistically means to be seen as a way of doing things better. A way of doing things better. Let's not overcomplicate it. Involving the use of tools, hopefully digital systems amongst others, efficient processes and governance guidelines as co-created with society and as may be required from a modern day local government. Innovation, how we stimulate and capitalize on ideation to develop new products, services for social value. I'm still intrigued why we struggle to engage our communities, who I would want to make the assumption are just as self-directed, equally and even more. But even if it was less, if we can assume that our communities are indeed self-directed, why don't we ideate with them to the extent where they take co-responsibility for what we create as a local government? People assumes the human interface involving employee engagement, knowledge creation, and citizen participation, amongst others. The next layer of the framework underscores the kind of relationships that could develop between each of these three domains, being the management of technology, the management of innovation, and the management of people. And from the research conducted over the past 18 years, it emerged that if people at work develop a good understanding of managing technology and managing innovation, and how the two domains can be integrated, they tend to show up as an agile workforce. You want to see my clicker? Yeah. So when you get that relationship between the technology management and innovation management, you see an agile workforce. If, on the other hand, they develop a good understanding, the workplace, of managing technology and managing people, they tend to show up as colleagues being able to align themselves to continuous change within their working environment. But it does assume that these two domains should be getting equal attention, equal airtime, equal importance. Being able to develop a good understanding of managing innovation and managing people, on the other hand, will result in an engaged workforce where all employees reach out towards each other, both internally and externally, to achieve a common goal. I just can't see there. So I just quickly want to talk through the systems approach. So although these three pieces interface with each other, it is also important, as we saw at about 2011, when the participants in this journey, both from public and private, indicated if we don't foreground our engagement with technology and with innovation and with people, if we don't foreground it systemically, the system will go rogue. It will constantly have a tendency to get into an imbalance. You get a power play between the one as opposed to the other. But if you can ground it systemically, you can actually make it work better. And the first part of the systems piece that we want to talk to is attending to the exosystem. Now, interesting enough, the exosystem is something where I, as a community member, may not have the power to actually change the system. But with you coming from the local government sector, you make the rules for me as the citizen. I have to comply. You tell me. If you drive over 50 kilometers an hour, if that's a rule, I don't know if it's done at that government level, then you will be fined. But do we understand, as people involved in the local government, all the exo-system dynamics? I heard it this morning about demarcations and about somebody from another municipality will indicate, well, you know, the people are toying, but we can't do about it because the money must come from provincial. How do we open up the understanding of what happens at the exo-system, the system where I as an individual cannot necessarily have any control over? The next part of the system that we must acknowledge is the macro system. And the macro system assumes what is the broader cultural or philosophical systemic drivers. Well, we're a diverse country. I hear constructs of socialism, and I hear constructs of conservatism. I hear constructs of nationalism. Those are all part of our macro system. And will they affect how we operate at the local government? They will indeed. They won't go away. It's there. If you go globally, you find it. You get a social democrat in New York, and you get a Republican as the president. How do we work with that macro system? The next part is the meso system. And the meso system is more closer to me as a member of your community. So what is the relationships that I'm involved with? I'm in a community where I'm involved at a church and at a sports club, and I may be a local business person. How do you and I, as members of the local government sector, understand my meso system? How do you interface with that? Or are we still across divided lines and said, well, if you belong to a certain church and to a certain community, well, then we frown a bit on you because you're not part of us. The meso system awareness is critical if you want to build trust. So that people can relate to all types of subsectors within a community and still feel this is my community. And the last part of the system piece there is looking at the microsystem. That's very simple. I am a 20-year-old, I've got a matric, I don't different matters. I moved to the rural areas 5 years ago, and I'm particularly concerned of what I see is not being attended to of people at a micro systemic level. So the assumption is, if you want to uphold the framework, you need to be systemically grounded. You need to have an awareness of all those different ecosystems that interplay and that interface with each other. Okay, now the system is just down here. The fourth layer refers to specific. So what we saw in a latter phase is once we have established the understanding between these four components, a next layer evolved, and we were asking people, now tell us, if you are successful in upholding the T, the I, and the P within a systemic context, are there certain competencies that you've seen emerge? And then we saw an interesting pattern emerging. Now in this regard, it's important to state that capability is evidenced by what leaders do, and as reflected by competencies often. Not the only way, but I heard it also today, we refer to what are the competencies required. I had comments made about capability building, about appreciation of complexity to run a municipality, about the need for expertise and the need to adhere to the required competence for appointments. So the first competence that emerged is the competence that relates to embracing, is that the one that comes up? Embracing transdisciplinary learning. Is that showing there? So, this is quite a stretch. Now, I will admit, we didn't see this in a lot of the successful companies. But in some of the companies that were successful, they had a very clear awareness of transdisciplinary learning. What can I learn from disciplines that I'm unrelated to? What am I learning from the discipline of local government, from architecture? What am I learning from physics? What am I learning from medicine? And transdisciplinary learning assumes that you actually stand back, draw the lens back to see the full picture, not to get drawn in by discipline-specific things, and then to make an interpretation of the reality. So that was one of the first competencies that we saw emerging between those people who were good in managing technology and good in managing people. So to embrace the alignment, the cross-cultural engagement, cross-disciplinary learning seem to be quite important. The next competence that emerged was becoming a global and digital citizen. Now, we heard a lot about AI recent, but this is in essence to be responsible and ethical in the use of data and digital tools to serve the community and to foster transparency. It's interesting if you look at the case of Czechoslovakia and Hungary post the previous regime, when they went into democratic state, is how they actually were extremely competent in utilizing digital and data to transform engagements with communities. Almost in the first few months after the change of regime, they just decided with one decision, no pensioner will get their payments anymore at a specific physical address. They had to be online, and it will be forwarded to them online. Just with one choice. Not because the society was necessarily ready, but the society said we would like to explore this because they engaged them. And it's still working very well. So becoming global and digital citizen is not something, again, just for us, the privileged, but I think it's something that will be relevant to all people in the community. Not quite. I wonder why. What are we doing and what are we not doing to work to that? Now again, you can't work, for example, to those three competencies if you don't have that basics of innovation and technology in place. But can you imagine if we, as a local government system, the exosystem, if we could just even decide just to do those three competencies as a matter of focus? How would our processes look? How will our contracting look? How will our development look? How will our IDPs look? So if I continue on that, sorry my slides just went a bit rogue. The fourth competency that I want to get to, in this regard, is personal mastery. Personal mastery. So when you get your people dimensions and your innovation well under control, then personal mastery becomes a competency which assumes for colleagues at work to make sense of complex information and being able to synthesize knowledge to ground themselves in the present while envisioning an ideal future for themselves. How much management is required if people are having this competence?
Yes.
Almost nothing. Almost nothing. The development agenda becomes something different. And I don't want people to tell me, yes, Ben, but you don't know the situation. I am again saying as a professor, I'm living in a rural space. There are two young lads managing my farm. We had an outbreak of a disease. I'm here. They got the medicines from the vet. They managed it. They injected that herd of cattle. Both of them had NSFAS bursaries. Both of them fell out in the first 7 months after school. They've got nothing else except 2 laptops, which we as taxpayers made available to them. But they have mastered certain things. The next part, competence, is about probing reflective engagements. Now, this is something that we may all struggle with. But we need to develop a questioning approach if you want to make this competence real, not an answering approach. but to ask the why, and the how, but particularly the why. A questioning approach, reflecting on why things are as they are before prescribing a solution. The next competence relating to that domain is to demonstrate social and emotional intelligence, and that's the ability to sense and stimulate desired interactions with, and this is important, diverse, often polarized public stakeholders. The great thing of a university context is whether you're an atheist or whether you're a Muslim or whether you're a Christian is irrelevant because you're at a university. We shouldn't think of how polarized we are. If we polarize to the point where we fight each other, then we must ask, I ask myself, what lack of emotional and personal intelligence do I demonstrate? Because that's a competence that should come when you're good in managing people, domain, and the innovation domain. Then when you go on to the next competence that developed as a result of being innovative and managing the technology, to start closing the loop, is operationalizing ideation. We had Prof Vio made a paper, presented a paper just in the previous session. It's utilizing design thinking to craft novel, adaptive responses to complex urban and social challenges. I want to make sure if that was the one because I can't see it. No, it was actually cross-cultural engagements. Sorry, I just jumped there. On the cross-cultural engagements, we'll just get it there. So, again, the awareness of the self as an employee at the municipality within this specific socioeconomic context, and how such awareness will interface and infuse services provided to the community. It also assumes the capability to operate in different cultural settings and capitalize on knowing the potential this type of engagement may